Hello, and a very warm welcome to this latest history episode of Venena Mundi. In the previous two episodes of this series, we started in prehistoric times, followed by the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and the Old Testament Hebrews. Although written records from these times are relatively scarce, we can get enough information to see that the roots of poison use go very far back in time, and that intentional poisoning was fairly common. Since plant and animal substances were used extensively for treating sickness and medical conditions, it is not really surprising to see that some unscrupulous individuals could turn them to cause harm. Having previously looked at poisons in the cradle of Western civilization, it's now time to journey 4,000 miles or 7,000 kilometers east to ancient China. Which poison became the favourite of the Chinese to dispose of unpopular rulers and emperors? Who allegedly gave the knowledge of plant poisons to the Chinese and then accidentally died by his own hand? And did a mythical toxic bird that terrified Chinese people really exist? To find out, please continue watching this episode of Venena Mundi. Let's begin by briefly looking at the history of China itself. It has generally been accepted that the cradle of the Chinese civilization is the Yellow River Valley, which gave rise to farming villages sometime around 5000 BC or 7,000 years ago. Thus the civilization is truly ancient and probably predates most of the Western civilizations, including the Sumerians and the Egyptians. These small villages and farming communities eventually coalesced into a nation under a centralized government, the first of which was the Prehistoric Cia Dynasty from about 2070 to 1600 BCE. Its first leader was the legendary Yu the Great, who began his reign by battling to control the flooding of the Yellow River, which routinely destroyed the farmers' crops. Having eventually contained the flooding, Yu turned his attention to conquering the neighbouring San Mao tribes, ruling his new kingdom until his natural death. Before doing so, he named his son as his successor, thereby establishing the hereditary system of succession and therefore the concept of the dynasty with which we are familiar today. The ruling class and the elite lived in urban centres, whilst the peasant population, which supported their lifestyle, remained largely agrarian, living in villages and rural areas. As with other civilizations, it's difficult to piece together exactly what went on until the Chinese people started to record their lives in writing. But surprisingly, for such an advanced civilization, writing in China arrived relatively late. Whereas the Sumerians were recording texts on clay tablets about 5,500 years ago, the Chinese only began to write during the Shang dynasty, dating from around 1600 to 1046 BCE, or a comparatively recent 3,500 years ago. Some archaeologists suggest that the images and markings on pottery found at Banpo village, dating back to 4500 BCE, are evidence of an early writing system, but these claims are disputed. As such, writing arrived late, and even then, for the first specific reference to poisons in China, we have to wait until the Song dynasty between 960 and 1280 CE. We find it in a chapter on poisons, written in an instruction book for coroners by Song Qi, the founding father of forensic science in China. He says, "For those who die of poisoning, their orifice is open, their face turns greenish black or green, their lips go purplish green, their nails appear dark green, and blood spews out of the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose." Although this reference comes from relatively late, it is certain that the knowledge and use of poisons in China go back much further than that. We strongly suspect that the Chinese already excelled in the discovery and use of poisons, some very familiar to us today like arsenic, and others with ominous names like the Intestine Rupturing Herb, Crane's Red Crown, and Three-Laugh Death Powder. Arsenic, the king of poisons, is perhaps one of the few toxins that transcend time, civilizations, and social class. We know it was widely used by the Greeks and Romans, and that it was a popular poison in China as well. For example, it was the poison of choice when the famously promiscuous Pan Jinlian and her lover decided to murder her husband in the 14th century Chinese novel Outlaws of the Marsh. It also caused the death of China's penultimate Emperor Guangxu in 1908 at the age of 37. However, for a long time there were several theories about the emperor's death, none of them completely accepted by historians. The medical records kept by the emperor's physician show that he suffered from spells of violent stomachache and that his face turned blue, both of which are classic symptoms of arsenic poisoning. This was eventually proved by a scientific analysis of his remains in 2008, exactly 100 years after his death. Forensic analysis showed that the level of arsenic in the emperor's body was 2,000 times higher than in ordinary people. Scientists concluded that the poison was administered in a single high dose. However, to this day, the murder of Guangxu remains unknown. Some think it was his younger sister, the Empress Cixi, who incidentally died from apparently natural causes only a day later, or the powerful Chinese government official Yuan Shikai, but no one knows for sure. Interestingly, the standard method to test for poisoning in China for hundreds of years involved sticking a silver needle into food, drinks, or bodies. According to the mentioned earlier Song Qi, to confirm that poisoning has taken place, a silver needle that has been scrubbed in soapy water should be stuck into the victim's mouth. If the needle turns a blackish colour that cannot be washed off, then poisoning can be confirmed. Strange as this may sound, there is some scientific basis for this claim. The reason why the silver needle worked occasionally with arsenic was due to the crude method used to make the poison. A sulfide impurity was often present, and this reacts with silver to form black silver sulfide, which would coat the outside of the needle. Okay, let's now look at poisons derived from plants. It should come no surprise that given the Chinese obsession with herbal medicine, the use of plant poisons would come very naturally to them. The earliest use of herbs for healing is attributed to someone called Zhen, who lived about 5,000 years ago. There is some uncertainty whether he was a real ancient Chinese ruler or a mythological deity and venerated as such. Whichever is the case, he is regarded as the father of Chinese medicine. He is also credited with introducing the Chinese to agriculture, for which reason his name is variously translated as Divine Farmer or Divine Peasant, or even Agriculture God. As such, Zhen is credited with inventing many agricultural tools, including the hoe, the plough, the axe, as well as several agricultural practices including digging wells, irrigation, helping to preserve seeds by dipping in boiled horse urine, and even the farmer's market. As if all that wasn't enough, Zhen is also credited with introducing the Chinese to the drink that they would become world famous for, tea, and also to cannabis. Unfortunately, according to some versions of his history, he eventually succumbed as a result of his own investigations into the properties of plants. During one of these experiments, he allegedly ate the yellow flower of a plant that caused his intestines to rupture before he had time to swallow an antidotal tea. Whether this is true or not, the name Intestine Rupturing Herb stuck, although the precise plant Zhen ate is not known. Instead, it has become generically applied to a variety of lethal plants from different parts of China. Amongst these, one of the most toxic is hemlock. In 2011, a Chinese local official murdered a deputy of the National People's Congress by putting this poison in the victim's soup. The symptoms began with a burning in the throat, followed by vomiting and pain in the abdomen. Eventually, the man died of respiratory failure. Another famous ancient Chinese poison goes under the name meets blood and seals throat. It comes from the upas or poison arrow tree, and even its Latin name Antiaris toxicaria bears dread. The sap of the tree contains a group of closely related toxins of a cardinalide family of steroids, some of which stop the heart. The poison acts so rapidly that the Chinese called this type of poisoning 7 up, 8 down, 9 forwards death, meaning that a victim can take no more than 7 steps uphill, 8 steps downhill, or 9 steps on level ground before dying. Fortunately, the poison is relatively harmless when swallowed. To act, it has to enter the body through a cut or wound, hence being an almost ideal poison for coating arrows for both hunting and warfare. In addition to using poison stealthily or in hunting or war, the Chinese also use them openly to help the sick die peacefully, as in euthanasia, and also as a political tool. In the case of the latter, it was called gift death, and would be seen as a way of preserving someone's honour. For example, the military commander, strategist, philosopher and soothsayer Liu Bowen, otherwise known as China's Nostradamus, is thought to have been given a cup of poison wine and told to drink it by the Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, who incidentally founded the Ming dynasty in 1368. To begin with, Liu was one of the emperor's most trusted advisors, but the relationship between them eventually deteriorated. It seems that Liu Ban did not fail any duties, but the emperor was simply jealous and even fearful of his knowledge, power and influence. Those deemed worthy of such an honourable death and gift from the emperor, including high-ranking officials or concubines, were usually given the choice of using a rope to hang themselves, a knife to stab themselves with, or a cup of poisoned wine. As the famous Chinese saying goes, "If His Majesty wants my death, I have to die." We don't know which specific poison was taken by Liu, but those commonly used by the emperors according to legend were arsenic and the exotically sounding crane's red crown, or the poison feather bird Zhen, or simply Zhen. Historians now think that the crane's red crown was simply another name for arsenic. However, the mythical poison from the Zhen bird could just be a legend. It is first mentioned in the ancient Chinese book The Classic of Mountains and Seas, written in about 400 BC as a compendium of geography and travellers' tales. In 18 chapters it describes 550 mountains and 300 rivers, along with 100 different realms and their geographies and cultural details. It also includes the descriptions of almost 300 different animals. According to the text, the Zhen was a purple and green bird with a long neck and a red beak, being the size of a falcon, which ate the heads of venomous snakes, hence the poison. Because of this diet, it absorbed so much venom that even its feathers dipped in a liquid like wine would guarantee the victim's death. The poison was said to be so deadly that it only needed to touch one's mouth and throat to kill a person. They didn't even have to swallow. The bird's meat was said to be lethal but gave off such a strong smell that made it unsuitable for stealthy use, whilst the Zhen's excrement could reputedly dissolve stone. The poison was in such high demand that some later Chinese texts record that the birds were hunted and killed to extinction during the Song dynasty. The only thing that was said to be able to neutralize the Zhen's poison was rhinoceros horn. These were made into hairpins, and the potential victim would stir any liquid they were about to drink. If it contained any poison, the liquid would foam and neutralize the poison. Eventually the bird gained such a mythical status that the word Zhen became synonymous with almost any poison. Chinese accounts mention many cases of Zhen poisoning in failed and successful assassinations, but because Zhen eventually became a metaphor for any type of poisoning in general, it is not always clear if the actual bird poison was employed in each case. Remarkably, the story of the Zhen bird may not be as far-fetched as it may appear. In 1992, an article in the journal Science showed that the hooded pituhui of New Guinea has poisonous feathers. The bird doesn't make its own poison, but instead absorbs poisons from the insects it eats. Since then, a few other species of similarly poisonous birds have been discovered, all of which also gave their poison in this way. So the Zhen bird could possibly have existed. Another almost mythical type of poison was gu, which apparently became a widespread poison in ancient China. It was made by placing several venomous animals into a large pot together. These animals included snakes, toads, scorpions, spiders, and centipedes. After a period of time passed, the pot was opened and the surviving animal was deemed to be the most venomous and poisonous. It was subsequently ground up and used as a poison. The concoction was used in dark magic rituals to attack enemies and manipulate lovers, and according to folklore, taking a small amount could help summon up a goose spirit that could transform the taker into various animals, like worms, frogs, pigs, snakes, or dogs. To finish our historical journey in China, there are two more mythical poisons to consider because of their allegedly astonishing symptoms. Unfortunately, the sources for these are very vague, so they should be treated with skepticism. Nevertheless, they are included here because they sound really intriguing. The first is 3-laugh death powder. It was said to be undetectable, the victim supposedly dying after giving an eerie grin 3 times. The other is the legendary body melting powder. It allegedly worked much like sulfuric acid, dissolving away a murdered body and clothes. It is rumoured to have been created by Ouyang Feng, a martial arts master during the Song dynasty, from the venom of at least 10 kinds of snakes and poisonous insects. The way it acted sounded particularly gruesome. The powder was sprinkled on the wound of a corpse, a slight smoke rose, and yellow water started to flow out of the wound. The smoke gradually thickened and the yellow water flowed more and more, emitting a sour and charred odour. Seeing the corpse's wounds getting worse and bigger, the corpse's muscles met the yellow water, and then it emitted smoke, which slowly turned into water, even the clothes. However, even if both these fantastical murder potions existed, their exact recipes have long since been lost. Before we end our poison tour of ancient China, some texts record that a poison can actually be used as a cure or antidote, as well as to kill. One of the best known examples of this is perhaps described in Wuxia, a type of Chinese fiction about the adventures of various legendary martial artists. The genre has existed and proved very popular for the past 2,000 years, and continues even more so today. In the story of the titled Condor Hero by Jin Yong, the main character is first poisoned by datura, which comes from the plant angel's trumpet, and is then saved from death by taking the mythically horrifying and lethal Intestine Rupturing Herb, which fortunately neutralizes the datura's effects. Okay, we've come to the end of this episode. Today we have seen how poisons took hold in China with enthusiasm that almost certainly matches the ancient West. Moreover, the rich diversity of plants and animals gave the Chinese a clear edge in terms of unusual and exotic toxins. Unfortunately, apart from their names, many are shrouded in obscurity, although we can make a pretty good stab at what these possibly were. One of which we are fairly certain is arsenic, which later also became the poison of choice in the Middle East and Europe. The history of this poison in these regions will be discussed shortly, but meanwhile, in the next episode, our attention will turn to China's western neighbour, India. Thank you for watching. If you like the content, please give it a thumbs up and use the comments below to say what you think or what you'd like to see in the future. In the meantime, please don't forget to subscribe so that I don't get lonely, and please click on the notification bell to make sure you don't miss the next episode. Bye for now, and see you next time.